Hello guys, we are on the new series on the chess strategy, that is the blockades and prophylaxis, and this is really an interesting series. There will be 14 games in this series, and each and every game would be very interesting. And the first game is played between Rubinstein and Salve in Lords in 1908, and the game goes d4 d5 knight f3, then c5 c4, now e6, then cd5 ed5, then knight c3 g3, and knights knight c3 knight f6, then g3. Nowadays this line, named after Rubinstein, is considered as the most dangerous for black. The bishop will attack the vulnerable d5 pawn from g2. Of course, white would capture on c5 after black plays bishop e7. Now knight c6, bishop g2, and c takes d4. And this is all theory. If at all bishop to e7, then d takes c5, bishop takes c5, then short castle and short castle. Now bishop to g5. It is another reasonable option for black. White keeps a small edge, pressuring on d5. Here, if at all instead of bishop e7, c4 is played, then knight to e5 is a good option. Here knight takes e5 cannot be played because the d5 pawn is under attack. And now after knight e5 can be played, or bishop to g5, then bishop e7, then both the sides castle, and b3 also looks promising for white. Now in the game, the black captures c takes d4, then knight takes d4, then queen b6, then knight takes c6. Here if instead knight goes to b3, then d4, knight to e4, knight takes, then bishop takes, then bishop to h3 gives initiative to black. So it was correct to take the knight on c6. Now after b takes c6, now castles, then bishop e7 and knight a4. And that is the point of this move order. Black now has a hanging pair of pawns in the center instead of an isolated pawn. Importantly, he is unable to advance it to c5. Uh, with this move, white starts the operation of occupying on the weak c5 and f4 squares and blocking the black pawns. Now queen b5, bishop to e3, after bishop e3, now castles. Now rook to c1. Everything is going smoothly. It is indeed a great pleasure to analyze Rubinstein's games. His plans are so natural and clear. Moreover, they are always supported by logic and dedicated to centralization. This makes him one of my best chess mentors. His games are so instructive, and it should be analyzed. Now bishop to g4, f3. Once again Rubinstein shows his skill. He rightly felt that the move f3 will be useful for white. It looks like a waste of time and a bad idea due to the blocking of the g2 bishop. If the move f4 follows, black will exploit the hole on e4. However, the bishop will be reactivated via the f1 square. It is no longer needed on the long diagonal because the d5 pawn is stable. Also, the f1 rook will be transferred to c2 via f2. Rubinstein always tried to find multi-purpose moves. Now bishop e6, now bishop to c5. It is useful to exchange all of the opponent's pieces that control the weak squares. Now rook f e8, now rook f2, knight to d7, bishop takes e7, rook takes e7 and queen d4. Beautiful and simple centralization. The queen protects both a4 knight and b2 pawn, while also securing domination over the c5 square. Now rook e8, now bishop f1, rook e c8, now e3 and not e4, as simplifications would favor black here. His pieces have more space. So then queen b7, now knight to c5. In front of the opponent's weak pawns are good squares for our pieces. Occupying them will result in a strong blockade, as illustrated. All the black pieces and central pawns are placed on white squares, leaving the dark squares horribly weak. White's pieces, knight, rook and queen, will use the c5 square at their leisure. The king will even use it in the endgame. Meanwhile, the black pieces are without prospects. The only thing black can do is wait and try to resist for as long as possible. Now knight takes c5, rook takes c5, rook c7, rook f c2, queen b6, b4, a6, rook a5, rook b8, a3. White practically has no bad moves. He will patiently put pressure on a6 and c6. Domination in the center gives him the ability to play on either flank. In this case, simplification will not help black. Now rook to a7. This is a blunder in last position. Now rook takes c6, queen takes c6, queen takes a7, rook a8 and queen c5. Now queen b7, king f2 and h5, bishop e2, g6, then queen to d6, vacating the c5 square for the rook and attacking the a6 pawn. Now queen c8, rook c5, queen b7, h4 and a5. This is a desperate attempt. Now rook c7, queen b8, b5, a4, b6, rook a5, then b7, and black resigned here. The game is just one of many convincing Rubinstein's victories, which left the opponents confused about where they went wrong. Control over the blockading squares c5 and d4 gave white full control over the entire board and led to the paralysis of black's queen side. So thank you all guys. I'll be meeting you in the next game.